Hello, everyone. This is Diney. I just want to say welcome, and we're going to go ahead and get started here. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we'll give it just a minute more. Have some others, looks like a couple more joining us. All right. So on behalf of Phil and myself and our team here at Harris Financial, we're just very happy to have you all join us. We hope this evening that you are all well and healthy. You know, we've spoken with so many of you over the past couple of weeks, and we recognize the impact that this epidemic is having on you and your families and friends, and the challenges that it presents. I just want you to know it's important that we know that we care, and we are here to assist in any way that we can. We've really been reaching out, but please don't ever hesitate to call. This is truly a time where we can appreciate each other and the connections that we have, as we hope to kind of see some stabilization in this situation, you know, the country and our economy. So we had scheduled this second installment in our education series quite a while back, and we're certainly grateful that technology allows us the opportunity to connect in new and different ways. In fact, this webinar has allowed us to add some of our out-of-town clients. So we'd like to say that's very positive, and welcome to all of you who are joining us from outside of Boise this evening. I want to quickly mention that you're all currently in mute mode, but however, we will be using the chat feature to collect questions this evening. Anything that you may have during the presentation, please utilize that box on the right of your screen, and we'll go through those questions. We're truly excited about the message that Dr. Hall brings to us, and feel it's even more relevant today. Our hope is that with this presentation, we can share not only some optimism and some hope for you, but tools that you can immediately put into practice. You know, I've been fortunate enough to see him on 3 separate occasions, and each time I have gleaned something of value. Dr. Roger Hall is the author of Staying Happy and Being Productive, the Big 10 Things Successful People Do, and also the author of Expedition. He's a business psychologist with clients all over the country, and he has one trick, the very cool trick. He trains leaders to monitor and manage their thinking. Great leaders work on themselves first, and then success in their companies follows. His clients are entrepreneurs, professionals, and business owners. He's especially qualified to help entrepreneurs who have had a financial event find meaning, purpose, and happiness for the next phase of their lives. He helps leaders become better versions of themselves so that they can in turn lead people better. He's had the chance to consult and speak to just all sorts of groups, from judges in federal courts, people in the intelligence community, company owners, executives, university faculty, social workers, teachers, nurses, construction workers, landscapers, and even box makers. He loves his work as a keynote speaker for financial services companies, judges, and technology companies. Roger received his doctorate in psychology from Ohio State University in 1991, and he's worked with thousands of leaders from Fortune 20 companies to very small entrepreneurial firms. He's currently an executive coach for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Clinical Scholars Program, and he and his wife live just outside Boise, Idaho here, where they watch osprey fish from a nearby stream and elk eat their shrubs. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Hall and let him get started.
Thank you, Diney. Thank you, Harris Financial. I'm grateful that you have invited me today. Let me get my screen set up so that you can all see what I'd like you to see. And Diney, if you're having trouble seeing it, let me know. So I am Dr. Roger Hall. I am a business psychologist. I got my degree, as Diney said, from Ohio State. I started out as a clinician and then moved my way over to do consulting psychology. Been very grateful to be doing that for the majority of my career, and grateful that I have a variety of different people I get to work with. Like you, I have been staying at home. It's nice. I actually, put grown-up clothes on for you tonight, so I hope you appreciate that. But in a spirit of candor, I am wearing my house slippers. So just so that you know, I'm in my office, and like you, I'm tired of being here, and I'll be glad to get out and about. What I want to talk to you about today is conquering worry in an age of panic. There's my contact information. I believe if Harris Financial doesn't already have a copy, if you'd like a copy, reach out to me. Probably the easiest email is roger@drrogerhall.com. I'd be happy to send you a copy of these slides. I start every one of my presentations with this quote: "Education without execution is just entertainment." I spend most of my time doing business education, and what I know is that if people don't do something with what I talk about, it doesn't matter. It's just entertainment. And what I find is that when people hear a speaker like me, they take a lot of notes, they write it down, they put it on their desk, and they say, I'm going to review this, on Friday afternoon when I got a little free time. And then Friday afternoon comes, and by then they've stacked more and more papers on the corner of their desk on top of their notes. And then about 3 weeks later, they move it to the credenza, and then about 6 months later, they move it into a file cabinet, and they never see it again until they retire. And so what I'd like you to do is remember the piece about execution, doing one thing. So I hope I have more than one helpful thing for you. But at the end of our time together today, I hope you will just try to do one thing. If you try to do more than one thing, you won't do any of them. Just try to do one thing. I'm kind of a quote junkie, and this is my favorite quote on anxiety. I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened. And when we're going to talk tonight, we're going to talk about the distinction between fear and worry. And worry is thinking about troubles that haven't really happened. The greatest source of error in any system, and I consult with businesses all over the place, and as soon as they have their processes in place, as soon as their machines work, their biggest problem is people. Fortunately, that provides me a great deal of job security, but humans are the weak link in the chain. In every endeavor, it's the people that screw things up by their decision making, that their emotions get in the way of their better judgment. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is how to overcome that. What engineers do is they try to make things that get beyond the mistakes that people make. And what your financial advisor is trying to do is engineer around the mistakes you as an investor are likely to make. Now, I'm a big fan of people. So I want you to realize I'm not just talking about you, I'm talking about me. I mean, we're all in this together, and human beings are inherently self-deceptive, so we need someone to help us. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about worry and about fear, but I want to start out by saying there is hope. We're going to start with the problem, but I assure you by the end, we will end with a solution to your worry. If you have worries about the virus, if you have worries about your family, about the economy, about your job, whatever it is, I'm going to teach you the solutions for that worry. Now, we've all been watching people completely freak out. And here's a pickup truck loaded with pallets of toilet paper. So here's my open question to you, which is, who doesn't freak out? And this is the moral of today's story, is the next slide. And we'll come back to it, but I want to start with the hope. People who freak out are the people who are not prepared. We live in Idaho. People prepare here. We're different than they are in New York City. We have pantries stocked full. We're accustomed to not going to the store every 15 minutes. So the people who don't freak out are the people who have spent time in advance preparing. And the good news for you is, unlike many of the people in the world, you already have a financial advisor. You've already made preparations. And so you can step back and not freak out. People who have no planning, no preparation are far more likely to freak out. So you're already having an advantage, and I want you to see how you can tame what's happening inside of you. So to start out, we have to start out with what are the emotions we're dealing with. Now, there are positive emotions like contentment, joy, and surprise. Those are the three positive emotions. And when we look at the family of negative emotions, those negative emotions are not bad, they're just unpleasant to feel. And so I want to outline these, and there are 5 in my list. This list is based on the list of a researcher named, I blanked on his name, Paul Ekman, thank you. Based on Paul Ekman, and he looked at facial expressions. That's what he did. He studied the facial expressions of tens of thousands of people. And he classified them as 4 negative emotions. I add one, and I'll tell you which one it is, because these are human universals. The one that I add to this list is not universal to every culture, but all the rest of them are. So the first is anger. And again, anger is a negative emotion because it's unpleasant to feel, but it does have its purpose. The purpose of anger is to provide productive activity to solve a problem. You know, if you see a child being abused and you're not angry, there's something wrong with you. That anger impels a productive action. Now, there are plenty of ways to do anger wrong, but anger is productive. The second is fear. And nobody really likes to be afraid except for people who go to scary movies, which I've never understood. But fear is the most life-preserving, self-preserving of all of the emotions. And we'll go into this in greater detail. But fear keeps us alive. So we don't want to get rid of fear. The next is sadness. Sadness is usually the result of a loss. So grief is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, the loss of the familiar. So sadness is a natural response to a natural transient response to loss. The fourth is the one that isn't a human universal because some cultures don't express it in the same facial expression, and that's guilt. And that's the family of emotions of guilt, regret, remorse, embarrassment, shame. And people say, well, I don't want to feel guilt anymore. Yeah, you do. Guilt keeps us from doing stupid stuff over and over and over again. People without guilt tend to have trouble all of their life and tend to hurt other people. So guilt in the proper amount, in the proper form, is really productive. Unpleasant, but really productive. And the last of these 5 emotions is disgust, usually related to stuff you taste. But if we transfer it over, it can also be contempt, hatred, malice. And I want to make a quick distinction here because it's not central to what we're talking about, but it's important that you understand that anger is a transient emotion, but disgust, hatred, and contempt takes practice. If you are experiencing disgust or contempt or hatred or malice towards another person, if you're embittered toward another person, you've been practicing. So I can be angry with my kids, that's a transient emotion, but I don't hate my kids. And so that's an important distinction. Now, the reason I outline all of these, because we're going to particularly talk about fear, is because very often when we're interacting with others, there's a default emotion and an underlying emotion. Now, the default emotion is what's on top. It's the tool on top of your toolbox. And very often, what drives that is the underlying emotion. So we'll make some gender stereotypes. I know they're stereotypes. I know they're not true for everybody, but you know I'm right. So if a man is angry, he looks angry. If he's afraid, he looks angry. If he's embarrassed, he looks angry. Do you see where I'm going with this? His underlying emotion could be fear, anger, guilt, but he looks angry, and that's because of testosterone. And so, ladies, I mean, we'll make another gender stereotype. If a woman is sad, she cries. If she's happy, she cries. If she's afraid, she cries. If she's embarrassed, she cries. If she's angry, she cries. Now, that's not a sign of weakness, that's a sign of estrogen, okay? Just as men express anger because of testosterone as their default emotion, men and women, because of estrogen, express tears when the underlying emotion is something else. So when you're dealing with your partner or your loved one and you see the default emotion, it's important that you go one level under and find out what's the underlying emotion. Because if I act angry, but I'm really afraid, what anger will usually get me in return is more anger. But if someone who's knowledgeable dives down just a little bit and finds out what's that underlying emotion, are you embarrassed? Are you afraid? Well, what does embarrassment get you? It gets you comfort and soothing. What does fear get you? Comfort and soothing. What does sadness get you? Comfort and soothing. So it's important that you understand what's the underlying emotion. Now, the same is true for tears. So if a person is crying, but their underlying emotion is anger, and you do, there, it'll be okay, and soft kitty, warm kitty, that stuff, you're going to have a really bad response, because I'm here to help. But it's important when we talk about, at the end of the talk, when we talk about how do you help a person who's afraid, that you have to know they're afraid first. They may show anger, they may show tears as their default emotion, but it's important to go one level under. So hang on to that for later in our talk. So why is fear the most difficult emotion to eliminate? Because it saves our lives. You'll probably have heard of motivational speakers who say things like, you got to live beyond fear. Well, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, because fear acts as the emotional guardrails that keeps us alive. You ever see those pickup trucks that say no fear on the back of the window? You ever notice how they're always in the ditch? Fear keeps us alive. There's a rare inherited condition where people don't feel fear. Do you know why it's a rare inherited condition? Because they usually kill themselves before they can reproduce. You don't want to get rid of fear. Now, there are ways fear manifests that you want to get rid of, but you don't want to get rid of fear. Now, worry is a specific type of fear. Fear is always present tense, but worry is anticipatory fear. So if I pull out a grenade, and let's say we were all together, I pull out a grenade, I pull the pin, pop the handle, and throw the grenade down. Fear is going to create some action right now. Anticipatory, so you're going to do one of three things. You're going to fight, you're going to jump on the grenade, or you're going to grab it and throw it out. You're going to flight, you're going to run away from the grenade, or you're going to freeze, stop still. Now, each is adaptive, but anticipatory fear is what you're doing right now. And you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if I do the right thing. Maybe I would freeze and then I get blown up, and maybe that's the wrong thing to do, or maybe I try to grab the grenade, but I wouldn't be able to get it out in time. And so what's happening is there's no grenade. There's nothing to be afraid of. But what we as human beings do is we mentally rehearse things and we start to imagine what will happen. And here's the problem. If I have fear because there's a real grenade, I take action, I do something, and I then am done with the fear. Worry, however, takes me to this point where I don't have anything to do except rehearse over and over what might happen bad, all of which only increases my level of anxiety. And so what worry is malignant pre-planning. So what fight does, fight turns fear into anger, jumping on the grenade, throwing it away. Flight is fear directed at escape. I'm going to get out of here, and that way I'll be safe. And freeze is called negative panic. Now, panic is running around with your hair on fire. Negative freeze is standing stock still and doing nothing. Now, you're saying, well, that doesn't seem adaptive at all, unless we change from grenade to snake. So if I see a snake, fight, I kill it. Flight, I run away from it. But freeze works with a snake because a snake will become bored and walk away. Now, if any of you have a cat and it catches a mouse, when does it stop playing with the mouse? When the mouse flops. And sometimes you'll have seen the mouse will use that to get away. So negative panic or freezing will sometimes help a creature who is in trouble get away. It makes the predator not so interested, so they have a chance to escape. So freeze is actually adaptive. So in case you're ever on a safari in Tanzania and you get picked up by a lion, just remember, flop, freeze, and he or she'll let go. I'm here for you, little tips. So every animal has the instinct to shut down under intense fear, but here are the two prerequisites. One, they're afraid, and second, they're trapped. They don't see a way of escape. And many human beings are having that experience right now. They are not doing anything because they're afraid and because there's no place to go. I mean, we're all stuck in our houses and there's nothing we can do. So there's a lot of inaction happening, especially as it relates to the coronavirus pandemic and what's happening in our economy and happening in our businesses. People feel completely powerless, which is a bad place to be. Now, worry is malignant planning because it has no productive action. It creates more inaction, the freeze. And then what people do is they loop in worry. It causes you to run away from things that aren't really dangerous. So you start to worry about every little thing, like, gosh, will I ever touch a doorknob again? And fighting against the wrong target. I mean, we all heard about the poor 87-year-old lady who didn't maintain social distance, so they pushed her down and she died. I mean, this is what happens when people get excessively worried about the wrong things. They get more inaction, they run away from things that aren't really dangerous, and they fight 87-year-old ladies who stand too close. So it's important that you realize worry only increases your body's response without giving you a productive action. And here's what happens. There you are at home, you're laying asleep, and you start to worry. You wake up in the middle of the night, or you're having trouble sleeping, you punch your pillow, you turn it over, you lay back down again, and you start to go down a decision tree. Now, anytime we're awake and we're focused, we can work our way down any decision tree and come to our conclusions. But when we're sleepy or we're tired or we're too worried, what happens is we don't ever come to any solution. And this is like the mosquito. If you've ever been camping, there you are, you're all snuggled in your sleeping bag, and you got this buzzing in your ear, and you wave it away, and then you pull up the sleeping bag and you fall back to sleep, and then later the sleeping bag comes down and the mosquito buzzes in your ear some more. And this goes on all night. You wake up in the morning and you talk to somebody who's in your family, you go, how'd you sleep? And they go, oh, I didn't sleep at all. I was buzzed by mosquitoes all night. That's the way worry is. We kind of brush it away, okay? We brush it away, and we never solve the problem, and it keeps buzzing us like that mosquito. What's the other way to solve the problem? The other way to solve the problem is become fully awake, turn on a flashlight, and kill the mosquito. That may take 5 minutes, it may take 20 minutes, but then you can go back to sleep. Laying there, incompletely solving the problem keeps you awake all night. So what happens is you never get to a solution. And the way our brain works is it is so easy when we're afraid to come up with the worst possible scenario. We don't come up with a more realistic scenario. We come up with the worst possible scenario. And we've seen this as people are predicting how out of control this disease is going to get. It's going to be awful. It's going to be terrible. 330 million Americans are going to die. Well, that's the easy worst case solution to go to. And so what happens is when we get overwhelmed with worry, we loop. We start down to the worst possible scenario. You go, well, I can't figure that one out. I can't solve that. And then you loop again. But it never gets to a solution, and you never look at what the other options are. And so what we tend to do is we cycle in this worry loop of the worst case scenario, and all it does is it amps us up for more and more fear, more and more worry. And then we go to negative panic, we go to freeze, we start running away from things that aren't going to hurt us, and we start fighting with people who aren't a threat. Now, I'm going to take you way back 112 years to what's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And you're going to have to get real close to your computer to see this, because this looks like a normal bell curve, but on the x-axis is arousal or anxiety or stress. And on the y-axis is performance. And as we look at low arousal, low performance, what do you got there? You got somebody who doesn't really care, so they don't do anything. These are the people who don't care and never get off the couch. But then as the curve starts to rise up, you start to see this is where people on athletic teams are in the locker room. What are they doing? They're getting pumped up for the game. They're getting ready to go. Okay, so they're increasing their arousal until you get to a peak level of arousal. And people who tell me, you know, Roger, I got to get rid of all the stress in my life. It's like, no, you don't. You get rid of all the stress in your life, you lay on the couch and you do nothing. You need a little arousal to have optimal performance. And so when we look at athletes, what do we see? We see basketball players who are in the zone. They can't miss a shot. And that's a peak level of performance. But what people are worried about, and I use that word advisedly, is going on the other side of that curve where they start to choke. You know, the freshman, I know none of us are getting to watch basketball now, but the freshman who's shooting 1-and-1 with 1 second left on the clock, pressure's on, they're waving signs. That's because he's got too much arousal. So what happens? He chokes. He can't go any further. So what I want you to realize is very often excessive worry impairs performance because we have too much anxiety. So how do you get rid of that? Well, there are solutions. One solution is to calm yourself down. And so you can practice meditation, which is very good. You can practice deep breathing, anything to reduce your arousal to get you to that optimal performance. Excuse me. But how can you turn worry and panic into productive planning? How do you turn malignant planning into productive planning? Well, first is you've got to do the pre-work while you're calm. So if you're a worrier, you've got to find a time when you're not worried, when you're not spun up, to plan what you're going to do next. And then you have to prepare. This is the word we talked about earlier. People, you know, fortune favors the prepared mind. People who are prepared do better. Now, I include this picture of a Vietnam era soldier cleaning his rifle. He's cleaning an M16, and he's field stripping it and cleaning it. Years ago, probably in about around the year 2000, I was talking to a man who's a Vietnam era vet, and I just was making small talk with him, and I said, so how many tours of duty did you do? And he said, well, I was a volunteer, and I did three tours of combat duty. And I'm doing the math on that, and so he was in the field for 3 or 4 years, which is really a long time in Vietnam. And I said, you know, what was your service weapon? Because he was a combat vet. And I said, what was your service weapon? And he said it was an M16. And I said, just out of curiosity, do you think you could field strip that today? He said, oh yeah, absolutely, with my eyes closed. And his wife said, no, you couldn't. And I said, well, what makes you think you could? And he said, well, the rifle was new, and it uses the back pressure of the the explosion to drive the piston. And so it's a dirty system, and so you have to clean it all the time because the last thing you want is a rifle that doesn't work in combat. And he said, so like when I had my downtime, I clean my rifle maybe 10, 12 times a day because I didn't want to die. And so he practiced this. So if he had 3 tours, 3 to 4.5 years out on duty, he had field stripped his service weapon probably 10,000 times. And that rehearsal, and it's not just rehearsal, it's over rehearsal. So that what he was able to do by practicing so much was able to do something so that even 25 years later, he could do it blindfolded. And in a time of stress, he had over-rehearsed so much that he could get peak level of performance even under stress. Now, if you were never in combat, but you did take piano lessons, you know the same thing. Your piano teacher, when you were learning a composition and you got it right the first time, did she ever say, way to go, you're done practicing, now we're going to go to the recital? What did she make you do? She made you practice it over and over again. You didn't practice it to the point of first time perfect performance, but you over rehearsed. And what this does is it raises your level of performance so that even when you have strong anxiety, your performance is still very high. And so when we work with people with anxiety because of the coronavirus, because of the economy, because of anything, there are 2 ways of approaching it. One is to reduce your level of anxiety through meditative practice and whatever. And the other is to practice the thing you're afraid of until you can do it even while you're afraid. Now, we're in a particularly interesting time because fear and uncertainty are connected. Now, I don't know what it is about psychologists, but for whatever reason, we love electric shock. I don't know why, but academic psychologists love to do these electric shock experiments. And there was one electric shock experiment where they brought people in, they put a heart rate monitor on, a blood pressure cuff, and they took real-time cortisol levels. So cortisol is a stress hormone. And so when you get a lot of cortisol flowing through your system, it's an anti-inflammatory. And under stress, it's a great measure of how stressed you are. So we got blood pressure, heart rate, and real-time cortisol. And so then they strap these people's hands to a shock plate. And then they say to one group of people, to the first group of people, they say, in 15 minutes, you will receive a painful shock. Now, you're smart people, you can probably guess what happened to their heart rate, went up. What happened to their blood pressure, went up. What happened to their real-time cortisol levels? They go up. Now, here's the ingenious thing, and this is based on a lot of research, and this is just one manifestation of it, which is they took another group of people, blood pressure cuff, heart rate monitor, cortisol levels, strap them to the shock plate, and then they say this: in 15 minutes, you may receive a painful shock. Not you will receive a painful shock, but you may receive a painful shock. What happened to their heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol levels? Yeah, they went up, but here's the interesting thing. They went up even more than the people who were certain they were going to get shocked. Now, just to make you at home feel better, nobody got shocked. We were interested in how uncertainty created anxiety. And so what we know is that uncertainty is actually worse than certain pain. So I worked with a dentist years ago and we did a seminar on dental fear. Do you know when people are most uncomfortable at the dentist? It's in the waiting room, because in the waiting room, they still have a chance to escape. They're uncertain of the pain because they can still escape. But as soon as they get in the chair, they kind of resign themselves to the pain. So their level of anxiety goes down. They feel actually resigned, but better in the chair if they have dental phobia. So uncertainty, and we're certainly in an uncertain period of time right now, uncertainty is an added component to fear. Now, fear and control are inextricably linked. Anytime we have a legitimate fear, we seek to control it. So this is a picture of my dog. This is my dog, Connor. And every time I take my dog, Connor, for a walk, I take a leash. Now, I love my dog, and he's a good boy, mostly. He's got a few little quirks, but he's mostly a good boy. And so I take the leash. Why? I take the leash because I have a legitimate fear that my dog will get on a smell, see a squirrel, and we're in Idaho, see a whistle pig. If he sees a whistle pig, all bets are off. So I have a legitimate fear he's going to run off and chase a squirrel, chase a whistle pig, who knows what, and hurt himself. So I hang on to the leash. Now he's got another quirk, which is if he sees the dog in the back of a pickup truck, he's absolutely convinced that it's space aliens who are there to hurt that dog. And so he just goes nuts. So if I see a pickup truck coming and he hears a pickup truck coming, what do I do with the leash? I cinch it up. I exert more control because I have more legitimate fear. Now, I don't walk around, panicky about my dog, but I know my dog, right? And I know his quirks. So here's the thing. We have legitimate fears, and so we seek to get more control. Those of you who have little kids, what do you put on the electrical outlets? Because you have a fear that your kid's going to stick a fork in there and get blown across the room. You put those little boxes on those so that your kid won't do that. So fear and control are inextricably linked. Now, here's the unfortunate thing, is the more you exert control, the more fear you will have. The only way you can get past that fear is to give some freedom to see how the person, or in this case, the dog, will respond. If your kid is 27 and you've still got the outlet covers on, you're probably too afraid that your kid's going to stick a fork in it. At some point, you decided, okay, I think I can risk it. And with my dog, there's certain situations where I can risk it. I don't have a fear that my dog is going to find a whistle pig or he's going to see another dog in the back of a pickup truck. So when I let him go, that's when I don't have fear, because I have trained him, I trust him. There's 10,000 things I know he won't do. There's like 7 things I know he will do. And so when I'm in an environment where I give him as much freedom as possible because I've trained him and I trust him. So this same is true with people. If you've ever met a micromanager at work, if you ever had a boss who's a micromanager, they have a legitimate, maybe it's not legitimate, but they have a fear and they're controlling your work and your work product in an attempt to get over that fear. So it's all related to fear. Now, as we're looking at our world situation now, I don't really have any control over, I don't know, disease transmission. Well, I have some control. I can wash my hands, I can whatever. And I think part of the reason people are buying pallets of toilet paper is it is something they can control. They can't control somebody else breathing on them, but they can control stocking their pantry. So people who are controlling in one way or another are very fearful people. But when we don't have control, like none of us have control over the worldwide spread of this disease, and none of us have control over the economy. What we then do is we shift. If we don't have legitimate control, we shift to information gathering. And those of you who have ever been on a train platform, if you're not, and I love watching people. I mean, that's kind of what I do at airports, anywhere I go, I find people eminently entertaining. And what I do is I watch, and I'll watch a person, and they don't look down where the train is coming from. They don't look like where it's going to. They always look like where it's coming from. And they'll look down the line for 5 minutes to get an 8-second competitive advantage over the person who's reading the paper or looking at their phone. They're seeking as much information as possible. So when we can't control things, what we do is we search out as much information as possible because at least it gives us the semblance of control. We don't really have control, but we think more information will help us. Now let's see how this translates into economic terms. None of us control the weather, which is why the Weather Channel exists. I mean, the Weather Channel, I read the report on it, makes $385 million a year telling people it's going to rain or not. And so people will be glued to the Weather Channel to find out what's going to happen, when most of the time you can just look out your window. And so there's a lot of money to be made in creating information to reduce or to, and it doesn't even reduce fear or alleviate fear. It just actually feeds the fear. This is what CNBC does, is it gives people lots and lots of information to give them the competitive advantage. I believe CNBC is worth somewhere about $500 million a year. And my favorite is the Bloomberg machine and the Bloomberg terminal. And Mike Bloomberg makes, and according to Wikipedia, Mike Bloomberg, it's estimated, makes $8 billion a year on this little machine that gives people information ahead of time. It's an aggregator of information. So selling information, providing information is a very profitable endeavor, especially when people are afraid. Now, why are we this way? I'm not an economics expert. I'm not a disease expert, but I'm pretty smart about people. The reason we're this way was observed 2,500 years ago by Plato. And he wrote this in his book, Phaedrus, which is the tripart view of the soul. And you're thinking, I can't believe we're talking about Platonic philosophy at this moment, but hear me out. So here's what he said. I divided the soul, that's the person, into three: 2 horses and a charioteer. The one of the horses was good, the other bad. The right-hand horse is upright and cleanly made. His color is white, his eyes are dark. He is a lover of honor and modesty and temperance, and a follower of true glory. He needs no touch of the whip, but is guided by word and admonition only. In other words, part of who we are seeks honor and glory and doesn't need correction. It just needs to be told, it needs to be encouraged, but it doesn't need anything else, and it does the right thing. However, the other horse is a crooked, lumbering animal. He has a short, thick neck of dark color with gray and bloodshot eyes. He's the mate of insolence and pride, shag-eared and deaf, hardly yielding to whip and spur. So you've got this other horse who's awful, stubborn, kicking, biting, always doing the wrong thing. It never does anything right. And then you've got the charioteer who's trying to get them to go both the same direction. And so what Plato said is this is the essential human nature. Part of us is good, part of us is bad, and part of us is trying to rein in both parts. Now you're thinking, well, that's pretty high sounding stuff. That's nice. I don't know why we're learning it. Well, all of you agree with Plato, and here's why. Because you all watched cartoons. Anytime a cartoon character is faced with a moral dilemma, what happens? Bing! Moral dilemma. On one shoulder, you have the angel. On the other shoulder, you have the devil. So Donald Duck does it. Kronk does it. Patrick does it. And Homer Simpson does it. And if you'll notice in this picture, the angel is dead and the devil wins. This is the tripartite view of the soul, which is what we see in cartoons. We have a good side and we have a bad side, and they debate with one another, and eventually the charioteer decides. Now, how does this apply to us and fear? Well, what we know about neurobiology is that your brain, and what you're looking at is what's called a sagittal cross-section of the brain, which is if you cut my brain in half and look at it from the side, just like this, you've got this. The part that's in purple is called the prefrontal cortex. It's the part right above your eyes. And researchers say it's called the executive function. This is where you do abstract reasoning. This is where you make decisions, where you limit yourself, where you decide not to have that extra piece of cake. Whatever it is, all of that happens right above your eyes. That's the charioteer, the part that weighs decisions and reins things in. But then you have the bad horse. Now, the bad horse is contained in two structures called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the size and shape of my little finger, the end of my little finger. Amygdala is Greek for the word almond. So these little structures are the size and the shape of party nuts. So when people say you're nuts, they're really talking about the amygdala. Now here's where there's one located right about here, deep where if you were to connect my fingers, and the other here, deep where you connect the ends of my fingers. And these two structures are the source of all of our fear and anger. All of it starts there. Now here's the interesting thing about how our brain works. The amygdala works faster than the prefrontal cortex. So anytime you take in information, zoom, it goes right to the amygdala and you have an emotional reaction, fear or anger, also some of the other emotions, sometimes faster than you can even think about it. And you know before you know. There's a whole nother lecture on that. Now, if you know that your brain is built up with this slow part fighting against this fast part that's going to take us to fear and anger, it's important that you start training this part. Now I'm going to give you barbecue advice. Meat takes on the flavor of the marinade. The more something soaks in the marinade, the longer it soaks, the more it takes on the flavor. And you're thinking, yeah, I know that. But what are you soaking in? What's the marinade that you're in? Now, when we're seeking out information in a time like this, where do we look? We look at the TV, we look at the internet, we look at our next door neighbor. That's where we look. And I want to do this thought experiment for you, is that when you're watching TV, you get that for free. Well, you pay for cable. But every time you're watching a show that has ads in it, if you get it for free, you're not the customer, you're the product. The customer for every show with an advertisement on it, the customer are the advertisers. The people that are producing this show need money from somewhere, which they get from advertisers. So the advertiser is the customer, you're the product. So advertisers know their audience. So let's do a thought experiment. You're watching football. Okay, there you are watching football. What are the commercials for? I've given this example 100 times. Beer, pickup trucks, pizza and wings, and Viagra. Those are the four basic groups. So they know their audience. They know that they're men who like beer, they like to drink, they like to drive pickup trucks, they like to eat food that's not particularly good for them, and they like sex. That's what it is. Now, in this time of fear and anxiety, where do we go? We go to the news. So here's my question for you. Not what's on the news. What are the advertisements on the news? Gold, insurance. Do you see where we're going? Fear in the future. So let's get to gold. Insurance, we've got to do something about that. Reverse mortgage, right? We're going to run out of money. And prescription medicines. Now, they're not prescription medicines for beriberi. They're not prescription medicines for malaria. What are they prescription medicines for? They're prescription medicines for stress-related illnesses, illnesses that we know are caused by stress. Anxiety, depression, heart disease, high blood pressure, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, migraine headaches. You see where I'm going with this? You're the product. The customer is the person selling the solution to what the news is creating. The mantra in the news is, if it bleeds, it leads. News does not start with the happy story. They start with things that are designed to make you afraid, because the people who are advertising on there are selling you a solution to resolve that problem. If you're marinating in the news, and if you're watching the 24-hour news cycle, you're probably freaking out more than most people. I don't watch the news. I get my headlines in probably 20 minutes, and I time limit myself, do it in the morning, midday, and after work. But I don't spend that much time getting the headlines because I don't want to freak out. I don't like scary movies. I don't like to freak out, but I do like to know what's going on. So what are you marinating in? And the more you marinate in it, the worse you're going to feel. And in this time of economic uncertainty, where do we go? We go to something that makes for great TV. Cramer makes for great TV, but good investing isn't good television. Okay, we're going to dollar cost average, and we're going to work our way in the market, and we're going to diversify our portfolio. We're going to figure out where your risk tolerance is. We're not going to get on the television. Your advisor, I hope they're not doing this, screaming like, oh my gosh, you know, sell, buy. He makes for great television, but he doesn't make for great investing. So it's important that you go to places for information that are going to help you not be afraid, because television is designed to make you afraid. So what happens when you're afraid? Let's say you're out in out in the Boise National Forest, and you're taking a walk, and there you are, you're trying to figure out some math problem. So you're doing some long division, and you're having it's a beautiful day, and you're in love with your spouse, and so you're trying to come up with a rhyming couplet for this love poem that you're composing. And you're doing all this on a beautiful hike like this, and then you see a mountain lion. Now, what part of your brain gets activated? Well, the amygdala, and you start running, fight, flight, or freeze. Now, I've been told that the correct response is fight, but for purposes of our story, you run. So you run. Now, when you're running, are you able to do the rhyming couplets? Are you able to come up with that thing for your beloved? And are you able to do your long division? No. Now, here's why. Is that when you are overstimulated, there's a thing called limbic hijacking. And what happens is the amygdala sends signals up to the prefrontal and says, you can turn this off now. You don't need this. You don't need to be doing that love poetry stuff right now, because there's a wildcat going to eat you. And you don't need to be doing long division because there's a wildcat going to eat you. Just focus on what's right in front of you, like jumping over that log and getting away. So it turns off all of the prefrontal. And what's the part of our brain, the slower part of the brain that solves problems, gets turned off. So when you worry, it turns off the part of your brain in this thing called limbic hijacking that keeps you from actually solving the problem. Now, you can go to the television, you can go to the internet, or you can go to your next door neighbor. Other people's fear will actually create fear in you. And back in the 1960s and 1970s, when you could do these experiments and nobody cared, they had students come in and they said, we're going to give you a vitamin called Ciproxin. And we're going to inject you with, and we're not going to tell you which it is. You'll either get Ciproxin or you'll get saline, which won't affect you at all. And so they give these students this injection, and some of them got Ciproxin, some of them got saline, which is salt water, which doesn't affect you. And nobody knew who was getting it. And they said, hey, the Ciproxin, it's a new medicine, it's a new vitamin. And so we don't have any money to get our own waiting room, so you're gonna have to wait with this other group. So why don't you wait here? Now, this was part of the experiment. So you've got half the people get Ciproxin and half the people get saline. And then half of each of those people go into one waiting room. And in that waiting room, there are two people having an argument. One has a woman crying in the corner, and everybody else in the waiting room is just trying to be ignored. And the other half of the people went into the happy room. And they're bouncing around a beach ball. There's a person telling jokes. They're crumpling up newspapers and shooting baskets. And then at the end, they asked the people who had been injected, they said, hey, how do you feel? Well, the students who got the saline said, I don't know how I feel. I guess I feel okay. But what was that experiment? When they were in the angry room, they said, I don't want to do that experiment. I got to get more credits for my Psych 100 class, but I don't want to do that experiment. And then they took the people who were in the happy room and they said, how do you feel? And they go, I feel great. I feel okay. I mean, I feel fine, but I want to be in that experiment. I got to get more credits. I want to do that. Then they asked the students who actually got the Ciproxin. Now, it wasn't Ciproxin, it was epinephrine, or the bottled version of adrenaline. And when they asked the people who got the adrenaline shot, How do you feel? They go, this stuff makes me feel awful. I don't think you should release this vitamin because I feel like I just want to tear somebody's head off. And when they were in the happy room, they said, this vitamin is awesome. I love this. You should get this. I feel great. Now, what happened is that people, when they got an adrenaline shot, interpreted that adrenaline rush by their context. If they were in the unhappy room, they interpreted themselves as being unhappy. If they were in the happy room, they interpreted that this medicine, this vitamin, made them feel great. If you're around unhappy people while you're worried, you will become unhappy. If you're around happy people while you're worried, you will probably interpret it differently. So it's important to surround yourself with people who are going to bolster your good feeling. And the second part of this is we humans are not that much different than animals. I was in the Chicago airport, which is my least favorite airport in the country. I was in O'Hare. I had my ticket, I had my boarding pass, I had my seat assignment, and I was there 5 hours early because I'd done everything I wanted to do. And I thought, I'm going to catch an early flight home. So I checked in, I had my flight, I had my boarding assignment, and I went to the gate where there was a flight flying me home. And I wait, I talk to the gate agent, and I say, hey, if you got any extra tickets on this flight, if it helps you out, I've just got carry-on, so, if you can get me on that, it'd be great. There are 3 flights going to my hometown before my flight. So I have 3 options before my flight. I have my seating assignment. I have my boarding pass. I got nothing to worry about. And within 20 minutes, I'm starting to get amped up. And I'm saying to myself, I wonder if they're like pheromones in the air and I'm, inhaling it. It's making me afraid. And I said, well, when I get home, I'm going to research it, which because it was Chicago O'Hare wasn't that day. I didn't get home that day. But when I got home, I read a research study where and you guys might want to sign up for this study. They had a group of people and they had them exercise. And at the end of their exercise, they took swabs and swabbed their armpits on this piece of fabric. And then they took these same people and had them watch a scary movie, which I wouldn't have wanted to do. And in the middle of the scary part, they had them raise their arms and they swabbed their underarms and they collected it on pieces of fabric. So far, you're already grossed out. But wait, there's more. It gets even grosser. Then they took another group of people and they were going to give them what's called a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan. And so they put them in this tube with an MRI with the added bonus of they inhale radioactive glucose so you can see in real time what's happening in their brain and where it's happening. So there they are. They're about to get into the tube. They've just been inhaled radioactive glucose. And the experimenter says, I'm going to lay this piece of fabric on your nose and mouth, and you need to breathe through this while you're in the tube. And all of you are thinking, this is completely disgusting now. So half of the people got fabric impregnated with sweat from exercise, and the other half got sweat from fear. And when they slid the people with the sweat from exercise fabric over their nose and mouth, and the people didn't know there was sweat on there, they looked at their amygdala, and what did they find? Nothing. It was just normal. But when they slid people in there, breathing through the sweat from people who were afraid, what happened to their amygdala? Their amygdala lit up. In other words, these people inhaled and smelled the fear and it made them afraid. So ladies and gentlemen, if you are afraid, you are contagious. Other people can smell it. And so it's important that you learn how to regulate your own fear and anxiety because you're passing it on to your loved ones through your facial expression, through the way you're acting, and through your pores. So what do we do when we're uncertain? We're afraid. We know that amps us up. What do? We imitate others. Whenever we don't know what to do, we tend to imitate the people around us. Now, back in the 1950s, a guy named Stanley Milgram did an obedience experiment. And in this, he was looking to figure out why the Germans killed all the Jews. And he said, there must be a screw loose in the German psyche. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pilot study here in the United States with red-blooded Americans, and we're going to see how we do and then compare it to the crazy people over in Germany. Sorry if you're German, I got German in me as well, so just hear it out. So what he did was he had one person act as a confederate, which is he's pretending to be a subject of the experiment, but he's not really. And that's the guy in the middle. And he chose this guy in the middle. He said, I want him to look like your sweet-faced Uncle Charlie, just a nice, pleasant, unobtrusive person that everybody would want to be around. Nobody would want to hurt. And then he had the guy in the gray lab coat. He said, I want him to look military without looking like a doctor and without having a police or a military uniform on. So he had him in a gray lab coat. And then they had the real subject. So sweet-faced Uncle Charlie and the real subject were in the waiting room, and they drew straws, and sweet-faced Uncle Charlie was always the learner, and the other person in the waiting room was always the teacher. So they, again, we're back to electric shocks. They strapped sweet-faced Uncle Charlie to these shock plates, and then they send the other guy to the other room. Now, they put him in front of this machine that is it's a shock generator. It's not really a shock generator, but it's for the 1960s, it's a convincing one. It looks like it. And it's got toggle switches, and if you flip one of them, it goes kunk. And then you flip the next one, kunk. And in case somebody was not sure what was going on, it says mild shock, moderate shock, painful shock, and then at the very end, under where it says 450 volts, it just has triple X, as if deadly. Now, they asked people, how many people would shock a person all the way to 450 volts? They said, you'd have to be a psychopathic deviant to do that. People won't do that. They'll stop. Now, sweet-faced Uncle Charlie at this point is not really getting shocks. The other person's in another room. They're talking via an intercom. And sweet-faced Uncle Charlie isn't getting shocks, and he's acting. So every time he gets one of the test questions wrong, the experimenter turns up the juice in 15-volt increments. It just keeps getting higher and higher. And all through this time, sweet-faced Uncle Charlie keeps saying, ow, that hurts. And then around 250 volts, he says, I refuse to go on. I demand you let me go. And then at 300 volts, he starts to say, I gotta stop, my heart, I can't take it anymore. And just after about 300 volts, sweet-faced Uncle Charlie goes, and doesn't answer anymore. And all the guy in the gray lab coat is allowed to say is, I accept full responsibility. This is an important research project for science. Please continue. And if the teacher, the guy who's administering these shocks, says, I don't want to do this anymore 3 times, the experiment's over. So when they surveyed people, they thought 1 in 1,000 people would shock somebody to death. You know what they found? 65% of the people shocked sweet-faced Uncle Charlie to the point where he didn't answer anymore, where he was effectively dead. Well, this really bothered Milgram. He said, we don't need to go to Germany. This is a human problem. How is it that red-blooded American men who have no history of legal problems and no psychological problems, because they tested them ahead of time, how did they do this? So they tried to get the numbers down. So they had the teacher and the learner in the same room. They had the teacher actually with rubber gloves on hold sweet-faced Uncle Charlie's arms on the shock plates. And they got the numbers from 65 to 30 to 20. Then they said, well, maybe it's a man thing. So they had women do it, and women came back with the same results, 65%. But they got the numbers down to 20, and Milgram said, man, we got to do something about this. He said, you know what, we're a democracy. Let's do a group. And somebody, you know, at some point, this, you know, we'll make a better decision as a group. Let a group do it. How many groups making a group decision shocked sweet-faced Uncle Charlie to death? Individuals, 65%. You put them in a group, 90%. 90% of people, when they were uncertain of what was right, and it seems pretty obvious in this situation, what did they do? They looked around, everybody else said, yeah, I guess it's okay. 90% of people would shock a person to death because they looked around and they saw other bad examples. What Milgram finally did was he inserted a Confederate in the group. Somebody said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. This is awful. You shouldn't shock somebody like that to death. And as soon as somebody decided to take a leadership role and say no to this bad idea, the numbers dropped from 90 down to 10%. And so what it shows us is that people are looking for leaders. In times of uncertainty, they're looking for someone to tell them what to do. What's the right thing? And that's the job of your advisor in financially uncertain times, to tell you what the right thing to do is. People, when they're uncertain, want somebody with more expertise, more knowledge, and supposedly more wisdom to show them what's the right thing to do. So fear is the bad horse. So how do you deal with this runaway horses in the limbic hijacking? So let's say it's the 1890s and you're on a buckboard and you got a team of horses, and there you are on the buckboard, and in the back are a bunch of babies. It's important that the babies be in this story. The horses, they see a snake. What do horses do? They rear up and they start running. Horses are exceedingly good at running. Their typical response is fear, not fight, but fear. And they run, and there you are. And you see that the danger is far behind. The horses are still running, but the snake is, 100 yards back, but they're still running hard. And you see up in the distance that there's a cliff coming, and you're going to go over the cliff. So what do you feel like you ought to do? Well, what you feel like you ought to do is rear back. Well, first you think you might want to jump off and let the horses go to their death, but then there are babies in the back. The second impulse is, I'm going to put the brakes on really hard and stop these runaway horses, which, if you have horses, you know is the wrong thing to do, because horses are not stupid. They say to themselves, clearly, this idiot behind us doesn't know what's happening. So what you do with a horse who's afraid is you join the horse. And so you have to start whipping the horse harder. And then once the horse realizes you're on the same team, it's steering the horse in a different direction. And this is what happens with our limbic system. Our limbic system shuts off our prefrontal cortex, and we're running fast to certain danger. Well, what has to happen now is somebody needs to join us. They need to soothe us and then steer us in a different direction, because the amygdala will shut down our ability to do it ourselves. We need helpers. We need people who will soothe us, join us, and then steer us. So when we're upset, and this is why we started out with those 5 negative emotions, the default emotion and the underlying emotion, the way to join people is by soothing them. Now, I want to tell you briefly about one of the errors that we do when we're stimulated in these high uncertainty times. And it was described by these two guys, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And if you've heard about the field of behavioral economics, it was based on work by Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize in 2002 in economics for the work that he and Tversky had done. Tversky passed away in 1999. If you want to read about these guys, Michael Lewis wrote a book about them called The Undoing Project. It's a great biography of their work. It's also a great explanation of their theories. But here's some of the mistakes we make. And their area of expertise is called decision making in uncertainty. And we are in uncertain times. How do people make decisions? Well, this is an earlier picture of them when they were doing their work together. It's a lot funner than that picture. But back in the 1960s and the 1970s, they were in Israel doing this research. And they have a thing called loss aversion versus expectation of gains bias. And people hate to lose more than they like to gain. So read this with me. You might have to get up close to your computer. But they offered these two options. Option one, choose between an 80% chance of winning 4,000 and a 20% chance of winning nothing. That's your first choice, against 100% chance of winning $3,000. What do people take? Well, people go, well, I take the sure thing. They say, I want a sure win of $3,000. Give me the money. Now, here's a thing called mathematical expectation, which is the expectation that this is going to happen, which is 4,000 times the probability times 0.8 plus 0 times the probability of getting nothing, 0.2, is 3,200. So on average, the smart money is to take the chance. Now, some of you might lose, but on the whole, people will get 4 grand. Now, here's the genius of Kahneman and Tversky. They were given another forced choice. Same people, another forced choice. An 80% chance of losing 4 grand, 20% chance of losing nothing against 100% chance of losing 3 grand. What did people choose? Well, when you're going to lose money, because people hate to lose money, suddenly you're going to get lucky. So what they did is they chose the first option. Hey, if there's a chance, it's like Dumb and Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance? So what they said is if there's a chance I won't lose anything, that there's a, and look at the mathematical expectation. Minus 4,000 times its probability, 0.8, minus 0 times its probability, 0.2, is a chance, on average, mathematical expectation is you lose 3,200. Where if you take the sure loss, it's only 3 grand. This is why people lose money in the stock market. Their stocks start to go down and they're losing. We all know how that feels right now. And so they go, okay, I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. I gotta get out. I gotta get out. Sell, sell, sell. And your advisor goes, no, don't do that. And then the market starts to rise again. They go, oh, I just can't take that kind of pain anymore. I can't take that strain. I can't take that stress. Okay, I feel confident now. Okay, you can get me back in the market. Now, I'm not real smart. I told you I'm not a money guy, but I thought it was buy low, sell high. Do you see what's happened here? They sold low and bought high. People lose all kinds of money because of the loss aversion bias. It's important that you realize, hey, in uncertainty, I will behave in ways that are not rational because my prefrontal has shut down and my amygdala are firing. What you need is a spare prefrontal, people around you who will soothe you and keep you from going over the cliff. Now, we all have 6 basic reactions to bad news. Denial, which is putting your head in the sand and pretending it doesn't exist. Now, that may work briefly, like when you get your financial statement, you just decide this month you're not going to open it. I can live with that. But then there's distraction. And what I have found is that people are using lots of distraction right now. Okay, they've watched everything there is to watch on Netflix. They're day drinking. And some people, productively, are working harder than ever as a way to distract themselves from the news of the coronavirus, from what's happening in the stock market. Other people go to detail. Detail is information gathering. I need to know all of this. And so they seek in all of this. Dormant, that's the freeze response. And the next one is the one that I find most interesting, which is self-deception. They begin to lie to themselves. And this is a whole topic for a whole nother day, but human beings are an inherently self-deceptive species. We lie to ourselves all the time. And then the last is the most productive, which is to argue with yourself or debate yourself. And sometimes you need to hire someone like your financial advisor to debate with you about the reality of the news. I mean, that's kind of my job, is to debate with my clients to help them apprehend their risks more realistically. So why are people likely to panic? Well, it's trade anxiety. There's a subset of firefighters and scuba divers who will take off their protective mask, and in the case of firefighters, they'll breathe superheated air and die immediately. Or scuba divers, they will drown when they have perfectly good air masks. And the reason is they have higher levels of anxiety. Well, soothing helps people with high levels of anxiety calm themselves down. So if you have a higher level of trait anxiety, which means you're always wound pretty tight, you need to surround yourself with people who are good at soothing you in times of stress. And you need evidence based on truth. We, as I said earlier, look around for other people to tell us what to do. You know what one of the biggest problems for urban firefighters is? It's not the fire, it's crowd control. Because somebody sees a fire truck and they go, hey, there's something interesting. And they start chasing the fire truck like a dog. And then somebody else goes, hey, there's something going on down there. And pretty soon you got a crowd of people running after a fire truck. which seems like a stupid thing to do, but people are funny people. So we look around for other people, and if other people are panicking and firing, following the fire truck to the most dangerous place you could be, which is in the presence of a burning building, people do it. So people will follow others to certain destruction. It's important that you look around and make sure you choose carefully who you're going to imitate. And there are lots of bad information out there. Information that accelerates the activity of the limbic system, and the amygdala is part of the limbic system. I mean, I love the phrase that Mark Twain popularized, that there are lies, there are damned lies, and then there are statistics. And it's very easy for us to look at numbers and get caught up in the statistics and the logarithmic charts and start to freak out. So it's very important that you look at the source data rather than just look at someone's conclusions, because it's very easy to be wrong in the forest of numbers. And the other thing is, if someone tells you an easily imagined disaster versus a hard to imagine disaster, and Lord knows that the television has been telling us about a lot of easy to imagine disasters. As of today, you're still more likely to die of heart disease than coronavirus. I don't know if those numbers are going to change in the future, but heart disease is going to kill you on a daily basis more than corona as of today. So it's easy to imagine the things that people are talking about all the time, and we tend to go there. So some people have a fear of the future, and that's related to trait anxiety. If you're wound tight, if you're prone to fear, surround yourself with people who will help calm you down. And then a lot of people have fear of regret. Oh, I wonder if I'll do the wrong thing. If I don't do the right thing now, I'm gonna hate myself. So fear of regret is the loss of upside potential. I should have bought earlier. Oh, I'm such an idiot. I knew Apple was going to be good back in the 70s and I never bought the stock. Or, oh, I knew Tesla was going to be something and I just waited. And the other is fear of regret of loss of money. Oh, I should have sold earlier. There's a lot of that happening, and it gets people amped up and they're not able to think rationally. One of my mantras is, when's the best time to plant a tree? 40 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. So yeah, you may have done things that you regretted in the past, or didn't do things that you regret not doing in the past. Well, you can overcome that now by doing it today. So why is this important? You have the opportunity to marinate in fear-inducing informations. We're in an uncertain time, and in uncertainty, we look around and imitate the people around us. The people around you are freaking out, and you can panic and allow the bad horse, the amygdala, to get you to make bad decisions. You need a spare prefrontal cortex. You need a spare charioteer, someone who will slow you down, join you in your fear, and guide you to a new direction. So what's the solution? Managing emotion, calming people down, calms the amygdala down. The amygdala gets calmed down, what comes back online? That prefrontal, so you can solve your own problems. So emotional management is an important thing that you need to be working on right now. Your own self-emotional management, and finding people like your advisor who will help soothe you and calm you down. And if it's your spouse, if it's your best friend, if it's your sister, I don't care who it is, but find somebody who will help you settle down. You need somebody who will join you and redirect you. What do you need to join the horses? First is empathy. Okay, you need somebody who is going to take your position and care about you. They're going to soothe you. That calming talk actually changes what happens in your brain. So you calm down. It's someone who will accept where you are rather than, rebuke you or make you feel bad about being afraid. And then someone who will redirect you. So there's a thing that happens, and this happens particularly in men. This is based on research by a guy named John Gottman, and he calls it flooding. And it's the combination of adrenaline and testosterone. You see it mostly in men. It happens in women sometimes. This is what flooding looks like. unresponsive, poker face. When people go, hey, are you going to listen to me? Hey, I'm talking to you, and they don't respond. They're like, oh, what? Oh, I don't remember. That's because they've got too much adrenaline, too much testosterone, and what's shut down, that prefrontal. So start looking for that. Now, the solution to that is not to snap your fingers at them and go, hey, snap out of it. The thing to do is to start soothing them. And what Gottman taught, and I took his training back in, I think, 2002, which is soothing and honey talk. And it's the way you talk to a child when they're hurt. Hey, it's going to be okay. Now, for me, my voice goes up a little bit. Hey, it's going to be all right. We'll work it out. Now, some of you, you talk like Barry White. Hey, it'll be okay. Whatever works for you, whatever your honey talk is, that honey talk actually changes how the amygdala works, helps the prefrontal come back online. So an interpersonal act changes what's happening in your brain so that you can feel better and think more clearly. And in order to deal with this, you need planning and preparation. You need to be inoculated to the stress. And there are three phases of it. The first is find out with somebody like your advisor, what are you afraid of? You got to conceptualize it. Is that fear really going to happen? And you need to look probabilistically at, is it really going to happen? And it's easy for people to just dazzle you with numbers so that you think all kinds of bad things are going to happen. But is it really going to happen? Okay, if it is, how do we control it? How do we protect against it? And that's why you're all wearing masks, and that's why nobody's going out and everybody's washing their hands and stuff. There are things that you can do to protect against it. It's not going to be a perfect cure, but it can protect. So first you need to think it through. The second is you got skill acquisition and rehearsal. You've got to rehearse these things. Remember that curve? We said by practice and practice, by rehearsal, you can start to do things even under stress at a high level. So when you feel afraid, you got to rehearse. Where are you going to go for information? Are you going to go to Kramer on the TV? Or are you going to go to that idiot at work who's pretty sure that the meteor is going to hit the earth and we're all going to be dead? Where do you go for information? You need to go to somebody who has your best interest in mind and has accurate information. So when you get nervous, you need to have, like, on your refrigerator how to call your advisor. When you're freaking out about your money, call your advisor. Or when it's about health things, I don't know who your healthcare expert is. Who's your dispassionate person who's not selling you a product? That's the person who can be your advisor, someone who's expert but not trying to sell you something. And if the world is falling apart, you need to rehearse how to think differently. And there are ways that you can learn that. There are lots of great authors that go back to the Stoics from Rome that will help you to think differently. And into the modern era, there are lots of people who can help you with that. And then prepare emergency directions. When you're freaking out, you don't need a long list of things. You need 3 things that you're supposed to do. So, on your mirror in your bathroom, prepare your freak out directions and make it as simple as the seat back card on your airplane. And the last is application and follow up. If you want to get over some freak out, you've got to practice this with your advisor. Keep talking about how you're going to react to bad news and where you're going to go and how you're going to find good information. And spend a little time discussing how you're going to alleviate fears, but not too much, because what happens if you start talking about fear too much, you're going to freak out. So talk about it a little bit. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up part of my childhood in India, and there's Aesop's fables in the West, and in India, it's the tales of Panchatantra. And there was this one story about fish in a pond, and one of the fish heard that the farmers were going to drain the pond. Well, one fish said, well, I'm going to search out a way to find our way to another pond. And he searched the way and found a little stream that could take them to another pond. And he went and said to all the other fish, follow me and I can take you to safety. And then the second fish said, we'll see what happens when the day comes. And when the day came, he flopped around in the net, and one of the farmers picked him up and threw him in the other pond. So he got out of it, not by advanced planning, but by spur of the moment. And the last says, I can't leave this place. This is where I was born. This is my home. I'll never leave this pond, and they won't drain it. And what happened to that fish? Well, that fish died. So pre-planning is probably the best way to deal with a problem. Find a solution, find other people who will help you. People are freaking out because they're trying to exert control. They don't have a good plan and preparation. And who doesn't freak out? It's the people who planned, prepared, and practiced. So as meat takes on the flavor of the marinade, how do you unmarinate the meat? You know, if you've got gamey meat, vinegar and buttermilk will get the gaminess out. So how do you do that? What are the habits of happiness? And I love this quote. It's the first line from the book Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. The habits of happiness are few and all alike. The habits of unhappiness are everywhere. So it's important that you adopt the habits of happiness. And I want to close with some habits of happiness. The first is mentally rehearse good things. Be careful of the songs you listen to, because if you want an idea to stick, put it to a song. So it's important that you fill your head with music that has lyrics that uplift you, that you tell yourself rhymes that are encouraging. You tell yourself phrases or aphorisms or quotes. I'm a quote junkie. And so, I have a quote of the day. If you want an encouraging, uplifting quote of the day, you can sign up for that on my website. The second habit of happiness is gratitude. It's finding up to 5 things a day that you're happy for. And what I encourage people to do is get a small pad of paper and a pen, and every day write out 5 things that you're grateful for, because your brain will go to the worst possible scenario and remember that. So let's do a thought experiment. If you've ever had food poisoning, you remember what it was. No one ever forgets what it was. Oh yeah, it was fill in the blank. They never eat that again. So here's my next thought experiment. What did you have for dinner last Thursday? No one can ever remember. No one can remember what they had for dinner less than a week ago. But I guarantee you this, it was mildly positive. And most of our lives are mildly positive. But our brain, because of fear keeping us alive, always remembers the bad. So what gratitude does is it helps you mentally rehearse the mildly positive events in your life. So make that a habit. 5 things each day, write them down and rehearse. Okay, these are the things that went well today. Surround yourself with low maintenance, highly happy people. If you're surrounded by upbeat, happy people, you will have a better life, and that will inoculate you from fear. And soak in the good news about the future. It's so easy to sell bad news, but I'm going to recommend 2 books to you. The first is called Abundance. The Future is Better Than You Think. It is a wonderful, hopeful book about our future. We are living in a great time. Despite what the news media would tell you, we live in a fantastic time, and it's only going to get better. And also The Rational Optimist. There are reasons, rational reasons, to be hopeful. And the subtitle is How Prosperity Evolves. I recommend either or both of these books. If you want to have a better view of what the future is going to be like, these are great books to read. And the final thing is have a long-term perspective. I had the chance to visit Albania in 2008, about, let me do the math here, about 23 years after the fall of the dictatorship. And this is a picture about 1980 of a rare fruit and vegetable shop in Albania. There's lines all around it. What you'll see is there are no cars, because nobody had cars in 1980 in Albania, just bicycles. And people would line up just to get fruits or vegetables. They couldn't get them generally. So in the capital city of Tirana in Albania, there was one shop that occasionally sold fruits and vegetables, and people went there for that. I went in 2008, and here's the same spot. You'll see this same building on the left, and what do you see? You see 28 years later, you see BMWs, you see cars, you see commerce. And if you take a long-term perspective, as bad as it was in 1980 in Albania, Albania now has, an economy where people are able to do stuff. So things are better, and you have to have a long-term perspective. So if you're freaking out now, I strongly encourage you to read history to get that long-term perspective. So here's my last point. Education without execution is just entertainment. I hope I've taught you a lot of things that I hope will help your life, but I just want you to do one thing. Now, if you're watching this with your spouse, I want you to tell that person, okay, here's the one thing I'm going to apply for our life today, and make that public commitment, but just choose one thing. I hope I had more than one good thing in here, but choose that one thing that will help you. And there's my contact information. Diney, are there any questions in the last couple minutes that we have?
Let's see here. And thank you. This has been wonderful. Some comments. Fantastic. Very much appreciate the daily quote. Is this on your website?
Yeah, at compassconsultation.com.
Terrific. Terrific. Excellent. And then what was the name of the Michael Lewis book earlier on in the presentation?
Book
Yes.
is called The Undoing Project. The Undoing Project. And
Perfect.
Michael Lewis is such a great writer. He wrote The Blind Side. He wrote Moneyball. He wrote The Big Short. I think this book could be transferred into a movie. He's done the best job of anyone explaining their research, even better than they did.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. Excellent. I think that's what we've got. Any other questions here? There is a chat box to the right side of your screen. The abundance title again.
Abundance. The future is better than you think. If it's okay, Diney, I'll scroll back to those two titles. Abundance.
Absolutely.
Is better than you think by Diamandis and Butler.
And actually, I'll tell the audience as well that we have here at the office a handful of both of these books available, that if anyone is interested, they can just shoot us a note and we'll mail those out to them, either of those books. So. And
I'd like to reiterate the invitation that if anyone would like to email me, probably the easiest is Roger at drrogerhall.com. I will send you a copy of these slides if you'd like them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. What an excellent presentation. We're very grateful to have you here this evening. And I hope everyone was able to glean some great information out of that. As always, we really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Have a great night, Roger.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Have a great night. Who turned it off? Must have been Chantel. Lots of thank yous.
Sean asked about books. You guys have the Undoing Project or the other books you talked about?
Yeah, we'll get them out to everybody that wants a copy.
Hey guys, I'm still here. Is there anything else you'd like me to do before I sign off?
Hi, that was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Hey, I am really grateful that you invited me. How did the tech work for us tonight? I mean, I just did my thing. Did it work out okay?
It did. Yes, it worked great. We had just a couple that had a little, hang on a second here. It looks like, let me turn this off. I think we're still live.
Okay.